which is just amazing. I always said, maybe in 20 years, some divers will go down there and find her, find them, because this is just what we've lived with for 17 years. It's just not fair. The unknowing is just not fair. I would say thank you. I think it's
You're listening to the voice of Jennifer Imbo's closest friend, talking about what her life has been like without her friends who vanished from off the face of the map. Was this a terrible accident, or did Jennifer Imbo and Richard Petrone fall victim to a murder-for-hire plot? Hey everybody, welcome to Profiling Evil in this special Missing Persons edition. I hope you'll take a moment, hit that like and subscribe button, and ring the bell so that you get all of our videos when they're released. And please give us a thumbs up. I hope that you'll share this video with your friends and you'll invite them to join the Profiling Evil family. Now, playing in the background is a 3D map of the route that I believe that Jennifer and Richard planned on taking back to Jennifer's home that fateful night. I want to welcome Taylor Nicholas of TGI Crime Day, who's joining me on this episode. You know, this thing was recorded more than a year ago, but we held off releasing it due to a number of considerations. I think it's now time to get those out, and I want to thank the Imbo and Petrone families for their patience. And please, folks, just be aware, the audio on this one, it's a little bit wonky. Taylor and I were trying to figure out a new microphone and internet connection that was less than ideal. I think you'll see why we scrapped that notion, because future videos after this one got a whole lot better. Hey, thanks for your patience, and let's get started with this case. And you know what? I want to start with something really unique, a public announcement by the FBI.
The FBI is offering a reward of up to $15,000 for information leading to the arrest and conviction of anyone involved in the disappearance of this couple, Danielle Imbo and Richard Petrone. The two vanished after spending time with friends at a South Philadelphia bar back on February 19, 2005. Case agent Vito Roselli says Richard told friends they would drive home in his black Dodge Dakota pickup truck.
All we know is that it was parked somewhere in the vicinity of where the bar was, because he made a comment about he got lucky with his parking spot.
The pair, who knew each other since high school, started dating a few months after Danielle split from her estranged husband. They both had become single parents. Danielle was raising her son in her home in Mount Laurel, New Jersey, where she worked for a mortgage company.
Well, there you go. We're talking about the case of Danielle Imbo and Richard Petrone, and this case is a baffling one. They've known each other for more than 2 decades before they started dating. Danielle was finishing her divorce, and Richard was divorced. They had put things on hold between the two of them while Danielle adjusted to the single life, focusing on her career and her 18-month-old child. But then something interesting happened. On February 19th, Richard invited Danielle at the last minute to meet him and another couple at a local South Philadelphia bar. It's a little place called the Abilene, and they planned on listening to one of the bands there. In fact, you're going to learn that Danielle loved bands. Well, at the end of the evening, just before midnight, the couple said their goodbyes, and their friends waved them off as Richard said he was going to drive Danielle home. Danielle lived in Mount Laurel, New Jersey, and it's about a 35-minute drive that time of night. But something unexpected happened, and they never arrived at her home. In fact, we wondered if maybe there was a change of plans and they were headed to his home. But again, they never arrived. When Danielle's estranged husband stopped by her home at 3 p.m. the following day, he discovered that she wasn't there. And that was the first moment that a report went in. Now, that's about 15 hours later. He contacted her family, and they soon contacted police. Closer inspection revealed that neither Richard nor Danielle used their mobile phones, their credit cards, or even accessed their bank accounts ever again. Investigators dissected hundreds of hours of video. They got it from the nearby toll roads and area surveillance cameras. but they couldn't locate Richard's truck, which is described as a 2001 black Dodge Dakota. They couldn't find any trace of it. The FBI wondered if they had fallen victim of a murder for hire plot. I was blown away to even hear that suggested. And you got it right, folks. An agent from the FBI reportedly made that comment for public consideration, and it hit the airwaves. This case is really interesting. Is it a murder? Did they run away together? Or did they happen to have an accident somewhere along the way? And let's not forget, could it have been a carjacking that went awry? It's time for us to really start exploring some of the possibilities surrounding this case. And I want to make mention, this is in no way an indictment on the lifestyle or the choices that Danielle and Richard were making. This is about two people who suddenly disappear off the face of the earth.
Absolutely, Mike. And that's the thing that's so confusing with this one, because there are quite a few possibilities of what could have happened to them, especially with, other people being involved in their lives. So hopefully we can find some answers. So something that I noticed about Danielle and Richard as I was doing my research is that they both were very creative people. Danielle was a singer. She had a beautiful singing voice, and she sang with a couple of different rock bands, and people loved watching her perform. She loved to be on stage. And Richard was very creative in that he worked for his family's bakery. It was something that was going to be passed down to him when he got older and was more settled and established. They both had beautiful futures ahead of them. They each had a child. Richard had a 14-year-old daughter, and Danielle had her 18-month-old son. And by all accounts, everyone said that they were wonderful, very involved parents. So for this to be a hole in their family's life, I can't even imagine how difficult this has been all this time with no answers.
It's really interesting that you talk about her music career, Taylor. I found it really interesting as I visited with Danielle's best friend. Her name's Deanna. And she indicated that she actually lived with Danielle and Danielle's husband before they were married. So they were all sharing an apartment together. She came to know him very well. So Taylor, one of the things that I really like to do when I look at these kinds of cases is to look into the victimology, or this study of who the victim is. And as I talked to Danielle's best friend, I asked her a little bit about what kind of person Danielle is. And I want to just have us listen to that for just a second.
Well, she was just a little ray of light. And, brought a smile to the room, brought a smile to me, brought a smile to her son. Her son just graduated high school, and he was not even 3 when she went missing. And it's just devastating. And like I said, I think this is wonderful what you're doing, and hopefully if it could help, I'm here to help.
At one point,
we were roommates, like, just previous to her marriage, just prior to her marriage. We were roommates. I was roommates with her and her ex-husband Joe and myself up until they got married. And yeah, she would do anything to help you. She was just a cool person. Oh my God, it's even hard to believe I'm talking about her 17 years later.
Deanne actually lived with Danielle and the man that she would marry, the father of her child. And I think that's really interesting, just because she knows what they were like before. She knows the dynamics. And that's going to play in big in this case, especially as we talk with the Adventures with Purpose team and describe some of the characteristics that were going on in the family, some of the pressures that they were experiencing, and some of the other things that they were facing. Hey, and I might also add, Danielle, like you said, was a gifted musician, but she wasn't a keyboardist. And that was actually one of Deanne's favorite stories about Danielle, as she talked about her, is a time when she faked playing the keyboard during a concert. And apparently the audience bought off on it. Listen as she talks about that.
Well, she played in a band, and we had, I often think there was this one time where she pretended to play keyboard, but she really wasn't playing keyboard, and she just went off crazy, and just little inside things that you know about her. But going to see her sing in a band was probably one of my favorite memories of her.
Well, hey, folks, I'm pausing to share some concerns I have surrounding identity theft and fraud. I've learned a lot from our partner, Aura. They're the pros at protecting people from cyber predators. Aura provides identity theft protection, credit and fraud protection, and online and device security for you and your family. They taught me to think twice before answering those online questionnaires designed to steal our personal information. You know, it must be working because U.S. statistics show that 33% of us have been victimized by identity theft at an annual cost of more than $56 billion each year. Aura protection plans come with around-the-clock support, a money-back guarantee, and $1 million theft policy. But here's the best part. You can try Aura for free by clicking on this special Profiling Evil link in the description down below. When you do, we get a small commission. But think about it. You insure your car and you insure your house. Don't you think it's time to insure your identity? Now let's get back to today's discussion.
I am really intrigued by the theory posted by an FBI special agent who said that the couple may have fell victim to a professional hit. I wondered, where did that come from? Is there something in their life that supports a claim like that? Were there things that led up to people believing that, or rumors? I did see that there were rumors that Richard may have had some gambling tendencies, but his mother said that that was absolutely untrue. And she said that her son had never even put a quarter in a slot machine. She went as far as to say he despised gambling. So I wonder, what's your opinion on that as to where they would jump to that murder for hire plot?
You know, it's interesting because when we look at a criminal case, we want to take all of the traditional forms of evidence that are out there. Things like, what did eyewitnesses say, and what if there's a confession? What was the confession? What are some of the physical things that are recovered, like a broken window or a fingerprint? But when we look at a case from a behavioral perspective, we try to set all of that information aside for just a short season to think about the behaviors in the case. And so I guess what I'm going to do is ask you what your thoughts are on this one, Taylor, because think about this. If in fact this was a professional hit, like this agent suggests, to me, it's tipping a hand of either one of two things. One is as a wild guess, or two, that they have a little bit of information that they're not sharing with the public that would point in this direction. And we were able to uncover and share with the team some important things that they needed to think about. But if in fact this was a professional hit, imagine how perfectly it would have had to have been orchestrated to get a couple that just at the last moment decided to meet at a bar in South Philly and then get on a road. What do you think? I mean, does it make sense to you?
That's the part that's been driving me crazy, because part of me thinks that it's possible, but part of me feels like there are too many variables as to them being together, because like we talked about, they hadn't seen each other in months at this point. It was kind of a last minute, hey, I'm going to this bar to see this band play. Do you want to come? She said yes. So how would they have known that they would be together? And if it was something where someone was targeting one of them, and I obviously don't know everything about professional hits, but from what I've seen and what I gather, they're not going to just throw in another person. That adds too many variables and too many points of evidence and things like that. So it makes no sense to me. And even if it was a professional hit, that still doesn't answer the question of where did the truck go.
But you're hitting on a couple of really important things, and that is usually if something doesn't make sense, it isn't true. Now, we have to keep as a possibility that the FBI has some kind of tip that caused that agent to say something. Why on earth he would say something, whether it was some planned event for him to say it in hopes that it ferrets out more information somewhere, or that it was just a wild guess on his part, is a really kind of interesting to me, and I wish I knew more about that. Maybe we'll learn more as this thing goes on. But I'm with you. It just doesn't make sense. I guess in other words, it would be that they were both really unlucky on that night for this to happen, if in fact it was a professional hit. But you uncovered some really interesting things, some kind of rumors out there about Richard and this gambling. And there was also another report out there that he may have had some ties to an outlaw motorcycle gang. What do you remember about that?
with that, there was a couple of things that were brought up with this possible connection of a motorcycle gang, with the possible connection with like a gambling problem. But it seems like everybody in his life was quick to defend Richard, especially because he's not here to defend himself. And it doesn't seem like anybody close to him believes that any of those rumors are true. So it's like you said, unless there's something that has been brought forward that is maybe being kept quiet, it's hard to know. It feels like you're just grasping at straws, and it's like a possibility without any actual circumstantial evidence to connect those dots.
Yeah, and if you look at that motorcycle gang that they were suspecting that he might be tied to, he actually had some relationships. He was questioned about a few things. The group was selling narcotics. I think there were 9 suspects who went to jail and were convicted in that case. It was a huge case, actually had ties into politics and all kinds of things. And so whenever there's a story like that, there are all kinds of ghost stories that spin out of control associated with them. But there were other theories.
So I think that one of the theories that gets called into question a lot is if there was something that Jennifer's estranged husband maybe had something to do with their disappearance. Of course, in missing persons cases, the first people that you look at are the people that are closest to the victim. And it's really easy to point those fingers at maybe the ex-husband or the ex-wife. As far as we know, her ex-husband, Joe, was 50 miles away at a birthday party for, I believe it was his nephew. And his stepfather is actually a retired police officer. And there were other active police officers that were at this party that verified that he was there, that said his alibi was true. There was a polygraph test that was done, but the results came back inconclusive.
Yeah, so
as
that's
far
pretty
as
interesting.
go with that, that's pretty interesting because I never know what to make of that with the inconclusive polygraph test, because from what I understand, you can't really use a polygraph test in court. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you can use it to impeach someone, to maybe twist them, turn the screws a little tighter, and also to say, I really believe what they said, plus it was backed up by a polygraph. But yeah, it can't go into court.
Yeah, what do you make of that with it being an inconclusive? Because I never know what that means. Is it inconclusive like there was deception, or inconclusive that they just weren't sure?
Yeah, we'd probably want to get a polygraph examiner to really give an opinion on something like that. But I never put a lot of stock in that because, again, if you think about it, in criminal cases, it is important that the criminal case is made, a decision is made based on multiple forms of evidence, not just one thing, because one thing can throw a red herring into this that would cause all kinds of problems. So we want to have 10 different pieces of evidence that support that A plus B in this case always equals C. And so it would be really interesting to watch this kind of unfold.
I also think it's interesting with it being pushed in the direction of a possible connection to the estranged husband, because by all accounts, they were pretty civil. I think that they had been through a rough patch where they were maybe going to get divorced and then tried things again, and then eventually did decide that they were going to go their separate ways. But it seems like they had an amicable split. They were still co-parenting really well. And not only that, but with Danielle beginning to date and beginning to explore that new part of her life, she hadn't been dating Richard all that long. So it's not like there was much time for him to even know that they were back together, which, again, as far as he knew, things were on hold and they weren't officially dating at that point. So it goes back to that hired hitman of, but when and why and how would they have done that when it was just a random meetup?
Now, whenever I sat with a group of detectives in a room and we bantered back and forth like this, you expected everyone to always take an opposite line of thinking so that you could get the best possible answers. And I do know that I read several media reports where Richard's family indicated that he was being harassed by the estranged husband with as many as 20 or 30 phone calls demanding that he stay away from this man's wife and other things. So there also could be this flip side of this behavior that we're not seeing in public. And we talk about that a lot in these kinds of cases, that there are actually 3 personality types that people have, personas in their life. They have this public persona like you and I are presenting as we sit on this podcast and we're putting on our best foot forward kind of attitude. But then we have this private side to us that maybe only those that are closest to us see. It's maybe where we do get a little angry once in a while, or we do say something a little mean spirited, and we probably correct it, but we do some things that only a few people get to see. And then in predators, we have this secret side of life where this Tasmanian devil comes out of us and really exhibits those innate emotions and frustrations and fears that we have. And that's the person that we're most terrified by when we look at cases from a criminal perspective.
I saw that there had been a phone call between the two of them that was maybe not so civil. I had no idea that it was up to 30 calls. That's a lot. And that makes me have different thoughts about the possibility of Joe being involved, allegedly. I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want to get in trouble for saying that. It's a very interesting theory, though. I just wonder, as far as, I mean, obviously, I don't know how one would go about hiring a hitman, but I would assume that there's some kind of a digital footprint or a paper trail or something that would lead investigators to be able to have more solid evidence that Joe possibly could have been involved. I don't believe he was ever named an official suspect, but maybe a person of interest in the case. How do they connect that? And like, would there be evidence if he had
Yeah,
something to
so
do
that's
with
where
it?
you hope that somebody, if there was involvement, comes down the line. They've been arrested on another thing, and they say, "Hey, I'll give you some evidence and information on this thing, a much more important case, a murder, than on this burglary you've arrested me on." And you'll see these people then become informants for law enforcement and work out a deal. We've seen it time and time again. But what is so interesting about this is that you can look at the dark web, and there are experts out there. And this is one of the cool things about this global society of people that are out on the web day in and day out. I have friends that run dark web businesses where they do nothing but explore the dark web for those secret names, secret
Wow.
passwords, secret identities.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess that's probably part of why I know the FBI got involved pretty quickly, which is not always a normal thing in cases of this kind of a situation where there's really no evidence to go off of with the CCTV footage and with, you know, there being a limited number of suspects. Is that like a different approach that normally the FBI would not get involved so quickly, or is that a pretty regular thing?
Yeah, that's a great question because the FBI actually has some skills and capabilities that will allow them to do some additional kinds of forensic examinations. But one of the things that's interesting here, too, is that the Delaware River is separating Pennsylvania from Delaware. And so the moment they would be traveling back to Mount Laurel, they're in a different state, not just a different jurisdiction, but a different state. And those are the areas where the federal government steps in and
Okay.
has authority that would cross boundaries. So there might be several different reasons, not only legitimate reasons of we need the expertise or the capabilities that the Bureau brings, but also we need the jurisdictional reach that the Bureau has. Having worked with Philadelphia's detective division, in fact, in this particular case, I reached out to some buddies at Philadelphia and got them lined up. They'll be meeting this team tomorrow
Amazing.
as they go out to search. They'll have the homicide division and the marine division there to provide them support. So, but I can tell you that that is one top-notch investigative team. In fact, my experience with them goes back to homicide investigations 20 years ago that I was working with one of the men who is now an inspector within the police department as part of the FBI VICAP program. And so I have a great deal of respect for the Philadelphia Police Department.
That's great. And it's good to know that there has definitely been extensive searches done and a lot of work has been put in to try to figure this out.
Yeah, it's going to be great. So now you dug up a couple of other theories. What were those?
So the most likely theories that everyone kind of goes along with is either they were in some kind of an accident and veered off of the road, or that there was a murder for hire plot. The two less likely theories that seem to not be quite as evident is, like we talked about, the theory with the ex-husband, and then also one last theory that sometimes gets thrown out there that I think would be probably the happiest ending, is that sometimes people believe that maybe the two ran away together to start a new life. However, there is not a lot that points at that, because both of them had kids that they absolutely loved and adored. And all of their family members and all of their friends said that is so unlikely, because neither one of them would have just jumped ship like that and left everything behind. And again, we kind of get into that side of things where even if that was what happened, there's no movement on the credit cards. There's no movement on their cell phones. They hadn't planned to see each other. That's a lot of work to do, a lot of planning at a very last minute, date at a concert, to just be like, let's run off together. It's a lot. So I think as much as like it would be wonderful to be able to imagine that they are somewhere living a wonderful, beautiful life together, I just don't know if that's a possibility.
As I look at and listen to you, it reminds me of something I'm going to teach you right now. And that is, there's an old saying that we use in these kinds of cases, and that is that past behavior is predictive of future behavior. And the idea is that, did this couple ever just disappear? Did they have any kind of history where they walked away from their children? And I haven't read anything that
I haven't either.
supports any of those notions. They were dedicated moms and dads. And it's interesting because as I don't know if many people know this, but Danielle's boy, who was 18 months old at the time or something, didn't you say?
Yeah.
He just graduated from high school.
Oh.
He's gone his entire life without his mother. And of course, that 14-year-old has since created a life for herself in Richard's family without her father.
It's just devastating. I can't imagine every day just wondering and having so many questions that are unanswered and that are really hard to answer, with there being all of these theories flying around.
Well, it's really this case, as we go through these scenarios, kind of pushes me down to two possibilities that have the most probable reasons for being the reason this happened. The first is, still, you have to consider that Danielle was going through a divorce. There was an estranged spouse.
Mm-hmm.
There was a level of frustration that was exhibited through at least what we've read in the public records. And folks, by no means are we suggesting that Danielle's estranged husband had anything to do with this. This is just one of the strong possibilities, and I'm sure something that he's had to face, perhaps unfairly, for the last 20 years. But that has to continue to be a consideration for law enforcement, because he would be one who might have a means and a motive to pull something like that off. Certainly angry about what's going on if the phone calls and the exhibited behavior that have been reported are true. It could have been they just happened to be in the wrong place and at the wrong time, and a carjacking occurred, and they were taken, and then something went awry, and they were disposed of. Those things have to remain a possibility, and the team has to consider homicide as one of those possibilities. But the only thing that really sounds credible to me is that this couple probably, and I don't know if they were intoxicated or not, they'd been at a bar drinking all night, partying. I don't know what that means for them. I don't know if they were intoxicated, but they left and they got into a vehicle, his reportedly. And it was either some distance away, and we're going to look at this on a map in a moment, or it was near the bar. And there are two different reports. One saying that it was clear down on the waterfront near a restaurant, which does not seem likely to me, although there's people saying that's absolutely true, and others saying he was parked on a street near the bar.
Mm-hmm.
But that they get into this vehicle and they drive away and they have an accident. And vehicles don't just disappear in the city of Philadelphia. They might get torn apart. They might get left on a street corner. They might get set on fire.
Mm-hmm.
But identifying marks would tie that vehicle back. Police would have recovered it somewhere in that huge metropolitan area. This isn't the backwoods. This is a metropolitan city that a vehicle doesn't just simply disappear in, especially for 18 years.
Right. And that's what I saw too in a lot of the reports. It talks about police officers going and searching local chop shops. Like, they know what's happening, they know where to look, but that still doesn't answer the question. Then, okay, if it was a carjacking, if the car was stolen and it did get, taken apart and distributed, however, it still doesn't answer the question of where the couple went. And it leads me down all of these rabbit holes because it just doesn't make sense to me. And like you were saying, on the map of the different directions that they could have taken to get back to Mount Laurel, there are waterways in every direction.
Yeah, it's a tough one. Well, let's look at the map for just a moment and explore what some of the possibilities might be in regard to that. And as you know, I love maps, and so I always have to go to a map and start talking about things from that perspective. So let's take a moment and look at a map, and we're gonna zoom in on the area downtown where they were last seen at the bar. Now, the thing that's so interesting here is I want to just take a moment and examine three possible routes that could have been taken out to Imbo's house. There's indication from the people in public reports that suggest that they were intending on going to Imbo's house. The first and most probable location would have taken them across the Ben Franklin Bridge. There's been some discussion that maybe they would have taken a much closer on ramp and caught the Walt Whitman Bridge to take that back to Imbo's house. And then, of course, a third option is that for some reason or another, they may have gone north to take the Betsy Ross Bridge and use that route to get out there. Now, this is really interesting, and it poses a number of interesting locations to search for the crew. But we started thinking about the possibility that they could have tried to go out to Richard's house. And so in all, we found that there were a number of very interesting locations that Doug and the team would want to consider as they were looking into this case a little more closely. And as we look at those, each has got some really significant and interesting things. For instance, if we zoom in on the route to Petrone's house, we find some areas where there are some tight turns, where there's some possibility that they could have gone into the river. Each of these are going to need to be looked at visually by the team to determine where the most probable site to visit would be. And some are really interesting when you start looking at places like this, where it looks more probable that they could go off the road and into the river. This is going to be interesting for the team, and we're really looking forward to seeing what they come up with.
So, Mike, what kind of advice do you have for those families that are missing their loved ones?
You know, these are always tough cases, Taylor. And the first thing that a family should consider, number one, law enforcement generally won't jump right in on a missing person if it's an adult. A child is a much different story. But the first line of defense is still call law enforcement and alert them. Tell them what the circumstances are around these kinds of cases, everything you know. In this particular case, telling them things like going through a divorce, met up with someone that they've been having a relationship with and it's been adversarial, anything like that needs to be shared immediately with law enforcement. This isn't a time for family secrets if you've got somebody that's missing. Then hit the social media network that you have. And most of us have a real strong network, and say, I need you to start looking at all the places so and so might go, or where you last saw them, or have you reached out to them. Keep trying their phone number. Make sure that you are reaching out in that manner. And then work with law enforcement to come together with a strategy of how to get the most people working on this case that you can without interfering with the investigation, because that's a real tricky part between doing something and trying to cover every stitch of ground and yet make sure law enforcement is managing and controlling this thing from start to finish. So what do you think happened to this young couple? Were they the target of a murder for hire plot? Or do you think they had a tragic accident and crashed into one of the many waterways in the Philadelphia area? I'm going to be looking for your answers down below, and I hope you'll take time to weigh in. I also hope you'll take time to hit that like and subscribe button and share Profiling Evil with your friends. I want to say thanks to Taylor Nicholas of TGI Crime Day for joining me on this particular episode. She joins Profiling Evil from time to time, but you can always find her on her YouTube channel. The link is going to be down below in the description, so please make sure you subscribe to her channel. And hey folks, I'd like to invite you to join our channel memberships. It's a great way to provide a little financial support to Profiling Evil. Now there are other ways, through your super chats or other YouTube donations, or you can go to our PayPal account for one-time donations. It really does help us get things through. Now on the channel memberships, my favorite, it's the Academy level, where you get a little more extra information, and it's a little bit ahead of everybody else. In fact, we recently dropped 16 videos in the Academy that are only available to channel members, Academy channel members, until May. So check it out. The Academy, it's only about $4.99 a month, so give it a try. Hey, thanks for your support of Profiling Evil. We'll see you soon at the next crime scene.